In the wake of the Christchurch massacre, people were discussing the culture of racism and othering in Australia. But more specifically, questions have been asked of Australia's ruling party and whether or not they've had a role in actively stoking racism and anti-Muslim fears.
Does the coalition have a problem with Islamophobia?
So let's take a look at this by diving into the record of the country's recent coalition prime ministers. The coalition, by the way, is an alliance between Australia's conservative parties, the Liberals and the Nationals. John Howard, Coalition Prime Minister for 11 years, is mostly remembered for his election win in 2001, where he turned a fear of refugees into an election issue.
But we will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come.
He was the first to use the military to turn migrant boats away before they reached Australia, where they would be processed in another country. During his term, he used dog whistle politics. Dog whistle politics is when a politician uses coded messages to attack minorities. It is using words like un-Australian or Australian way of life to highlight the otherness of certain communities. Or it's using words like boat people, illegals or undesirables to describe refugees. And Howard successfully used the tactic to stay in office until 2007. The coalition won power again in 2013 under Tony Abbott, who returned to Howard's dog whistle politics.
For at least a decade, the coalition's position has been crystal clear. We will stop the boats.
Asylum seekers who arrived by boat during this time were detained in offshore detention centres in Manus and Nauru with no possible hopes of ever settling in Australia.
Those seeking to come on boats will not be getting what they have come for.
Since 2013, 3,127 people, including children, have been sent to Nauru and Manus. They have mainly come from Iran, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, Iraq and Somalia. There have also been a large number of Rohingya Muslims escaping violent persecution in Myanmar. And the policy has been met with heavy criticism. One UN report said the policy has breached international conventions on torture and punishment, and the UNHCR has called the policy dire and untenable and immensely harmful. Many Australians have also been critical. A former president of the Australian Human Rights Commission called the policy illegal and inhumane, and a representative of the lobby group Get Up called it an institutional abuse of men, women and children. The Abbott government also tried to weaken the laws against racial discrimination. The country's top lawyer at the time had this to say about it.
Should people have the right to say things that other people find insulting or offensive or wounding? And I think they should.
People do have a right to be bigots, you know.
Then there was Abbott's rhetoric about Muslims themselves.
Now, I've often heard Western leaders describe Islam as a religion of peace. I wish more Muslim leaders would say that more often and mean it.
He has said multiple times that there is a problem with Islam and that it must change, and that the West has a clear superiority over Islam. At the height of the refugee crisis, Abbott's government decided to prioritise non-Muslim migrants and was accused of exaggerating the terror threat to mask poor economic management. However, as Abbott's popularity sank, the coalition decided to change leaders, and in came Malcolm Turnbull, who then won the 2016 election. But he was ousted by his own party only 2 years later for not being right-wing enough.
There was a determined insurgency from a number of people, both in the party room and sort of backed by voices, powerful voices in the media.
During this time, factions in the coalition worked closely with nationalists such as Pauline Hanson, who has a record of anti-Muslim sentiments.
Islam is a disease.
Now we are in danger of being swamped by Muslims.
Pressure the government to say no more Muslims in Australia.
And here's the thing, the coalition largely embraced her. They voted with her recent motion saying it's okay to be white, echoing a popular white supremacist slogan which reflects a belief that migrants are taking over Australia. And there are many like-minded politicians in Parliament, such as Malcolm Roberts, George Christensen, Corey Bernardi, and Fraser Anning, the same guy who infamously blamed Muslims for the Christchurch attacks. Which leads us back to Australia's current Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, who has finally faced questions about the legacy of racism in the coalition.
When you have people in your coalition, George Christensen speaking at a Reclaim Australia rally, when you've got a former Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, saying that Islamophobia never killed anybody, when you have Peter Dutton suggesting that Lebanese immigration in the 70s was a mistake, when you have multiple, I think 7, coalition senators shaking Fraser Anning's hand after he gives the final solution speech in Parliament, when I aggregate all that, Is there something that does need to be confronted within your own party?
And his answers have not been convincing.
It is not for the party to answer for every single member on every single occasion.